What's up, Amsterdam? Welcome back. So my name is Pat Riley. I'm the creative director for BTC Inc. Today, I want to continue building on that previous panel a little bit and talk about the symbolism and design language of Bitcoin. I don't think this topic is analyzed enough, but I think it's critical. Too often, we're caught up in the charts, the debates, and the technical details. We forget that design is the interface between Bitcoin and culture, whether it's the branding, the products we build, or even the events that we attend. Design is how Bitcoin meets culture. So I've spent over a decade working on full-time on Bitcoin design, and in that time, I built some of the most recognizable brands in the space, designed the world's largest Bitcoin conference, had a front row seat as Bitcoin went from a fringe experiment into a global cultural revolution. And like all great revolutions, I've seen Bitcoin develop its own set of symbols, its own cultural identity, and even its own shared mythology. Today, the Bitcoin brand is everywhere. Millions have embraced it, billions have at least heard of it, but it wasn't always that way. To understand how we got here, we got to look back to where it all began, with the cypherpunks. And I have a huge amount of respect for the cypherpunks. They defended cryptography, privacy, and freedom to write code long before it was popular. But when it came to branding, UI, and design, let's just say they weren't exactly fans. In the cypherpunk world, text was their interface, code was their culture, and mathematics was the message. The goal was logic, not aesthetics. To them, symbols and brands were tools wielded by corporations, states, and institutions to sway and influence the general public, exactly what they were fighting against. They viewed brands and logos as ways to mask the truth, right? A beautiful interface was considered suspect, an unnecessary layer between the user and reality. Logos were rejected in favor of ASCII-like text displays and terminals, and manifestos were delivered in raw HTML. They believed the truth shouldn't need packaging. But in doing so, they underestimated something critical, the cultural layer of technology adoption. Because here is the key part. No matter how hard you try, you can't suppress our instinct to create meaning. You can't stop the mind from forming symbols. And even if you reduce everything to pure code, humans will still find a way to fill that empty space with a story. And there are many symbols in Bitcoin today that carry the DNA of those earlier days. For example, you have Satoshi Nakamoto, right? The hooded anonymous creator. This is our creation myth. It represents privacy, rebellion, hacker culture, and the idea that a single individual can change the world devoid of ego. Every movement has an origin story, and this is ours. We also have the Guy Fawkes mask, right? Originally, this symbol was used as a warning against rebellion, a reminder of a failed uprising. But over time, it was reclaimed, reinterpreted, and reborn. These days, it represents speaking truth to power, decentralized resistance, and the individual against the institution. This is a perfect example of how symbols change over time. And finally, we have the code itself, right? In the absence of logos and branding, the raw code became the identity. The hex dumps, command line outputs, the Genesis block itself. These forms became visual symbols in their own right, so much so that we now see it on an American Express card today. But as you can see, these early symbols were dark, cryptic, technical, almost ominous in their flavor. The visual language said, we operate in the shadows, and if you don't know how to use a terminal, forget about it. They're inherently limiting, powerful for insiders, but inaccessible for everyone else. We needed something brighter. We needed something more hopeful, right? We needed the Bitcoin symbol. And this is the logo I was greeted at when I first started working in Bitcoin full-time. As many of you know, this is actually the third iteration of the Bitcoin logo, evolving from Satoshi's original design. And it was posted on the Bitcoin talk forums by a user named BitBoy. And it was clear this guy must have been an engineer, because if you break it down, there's tons of intentional structure and symbolism within it. The two vertical lines are, of course, adapted from other currency symbols, but the motif actually traces back to the Spanish peso, where the two bars are speculated to represent the Pillars of Hercules, or Atlas, holding up the world. Bitcoin inherits that lineage, a currency for the future. The logo's rotated at precisely 13.88 degrees, leaning forward. And the scaling ratio of the circle is based off of 42, which, as we all know, is the answer to life, the universe, and everything. A little cosmic humor baked directly into the brand. You can tell an engineer made this, but here's the thing. It still holds up, it's solid, and it's iconic. And then there's the orange, right? The orange was brilliant. Orange is the color of energy. Orange is the color of fire. And orange is the color of the Dutch, right? It's loud, there you go. It's loud, optimistic, and it says, we are not hiding anymore, we are here. But here's where it gets interesting, right? In 2010, BitBoy openly admitted that he drew inspiration from Visa and MasterCard, the very institutions that Bitcoin was trying to disrupt. He said, the irony is, as much as I hate MasterCard and Visa, it's all about perception when it comes to consumer confidence and behavior. And that's the key insight here, right? It's all about perception, not just the code, not just the technology, but how people feel when they encounter it. Around this time, Bitcoin started making news headlines, but the imagery was all over the place. Cachexious coins, price charts, generic stock imagery that you still see today. There was no coherent visual identity. And while this was a feature in the code, to the general public, a lack of a shared design language was confusing. So this is me in 2014, an intern at my first design job, and this was the landscape I was stepping into, surrounded by engineers, crypto anarchists, and it was here that we designed the first Bitcoin payment URLs, long before the average user even knew what to do with a QR code, and the first multi-sig wallets, all open source. But I had this question that kept me up at night as I entered into this industry, which was, how does a decentralized group agree on a symbol at all, right? And the truth is, there is no official Bitcoin logo, right? The orange Bitcoin symbol that we all know and love is MIT licensed and open to anybody. Anyone can create their own variation on it, and many have tried. We saw this play out in the Blocksize wars. Competing forks had to brand themselves to differentiate. And at some level, this was a battle over the Bitcoin brand itself. It was not just a technical debate, it was a struggle over identity and a battle on who gets to be Bitcoin. And in the end, the orange Bitcoin brand did not win because it was the best design. It won because it was the oldest and most widely distributed and most repeated. Rather than a memetic evolution, like we see with memes, where we go from variation to competition and selection, Bitcoin logo followed more of a thermodynamic model, right? Initial energy, replication, and a reversibility. And so the orange B became the banner that we still fly to this day. But this was just the beginning of something much larger. Once we had a banner to rally around, something deeper formed, a tribe, a movement, a revolution. We watched an entire culture emerge in real time over the years. And while Bitcoin is a global community, and while our politics, backgrounds, and financial situations may all be different, we are gathered under one shared symbol and one shared belief. From there, symbols expanded into the cultural pillars that every enduring movement has. Symbols, language, values, right? We didn't just create a new form of money, we created a new culture. But human beings have always done this, right? This is no surprise. Since ancient times, we've used symbols to compress complex ideas into forms we can share. Symbols are how we define who belongs, communicates what we believe, and visualize meaning together. And like all early cultures, we turn to animals to express this story first. We have the bull, right? Symbol is all the civilization itself, representing strength and conviction and an unstoppable force. We also have the rabbit, right? This is my personal favorite, representing curiosity, hidden knowledge, and unseen realities. Going down the rabbit hole, it speaks to the intellectual journey that we've all been on and functions as an initiation ritual. We also have the frog, of course. The frog is a creature that lives between worlds, both outsider and insider. It represents the underground culture, the humor, the irreverence, and the internet native identity of Bitcoin. And last but not least, we have the honey badger, right? Honey badger doesn't care. It's immune to threat, intimidation, and attack. It keeps going. It represents the anti-fragile nature of Bitcoin. I don't know of any other movement that's adapted the honey badger, but we love it. And so quite naturally, we just saw how we developed a modern mythology, like organically. Some of these symbols are unique to Bitcoin, and some are borrowed and reinterpreted from other cultures, which is exactly how myth has always evolved. No matter how strange or playful these symbols may seem on the outside, it's hard to deny that they carry real meaning. They've taken on lives of their own. And so once we have a set of symbols, the next layer always emerges, right? Language, short phrases, inside jokes, ritual sayings. These become the glue that hold the identity together. And you already know these, right? Some of them are up here on the screen. Hodl, not your keys, not your coins, don't trust, verify, always has been. But these are more than memes. These are compressed wisdom. And many of them have a visual representation to go along with them. But they weren't accidental either, right? These serve a critical psychological function. I believe Bitcoin has a collective unconscious. And while one person might have come up with each individual meme, we have a hive mind of sorts that propagates and adapts them. A shared identity that celebrates together, suffers together, learns together, and pushes forward together. They aren't marketing slogans, they're survival codes for the digital frontier, and they helped us endure volatility, resist censorship, and shrug off ridicule over the years. But most importantly, these symbols and mantras preserved our history and reinforced the mythology as we grew. And we have learned a lot of lessons along the way, lessons that need to be remembered as we enter the next epoch. So what holds us together? Financial incentives are at the core of how Bitcoin works, of course, but there's something deeper happening here. Identity, meaning, belonging. Kind of sounds like a religion, right? Well, I think it may look like that from the outside, but I think there's a clear distinction here. We're not trying to answer the meaning of life with Bitcoin. We're trying to answer something more concrete. How do you build a strong society on stable monetary foundation? But despite this, the similarities are striking, right? We have the moon, transcendence and hope. We have Satoshi, the absent deity, right? The founding prophet. We have the Genesis block, the creation myth. And we even have halvings and holidays, which act as calendars. But I would argue that these emerged organically and within the individual, but not by decree. Because Bitcoin doesn't just shape culture, it shapes the individual. It spreads peer-to-peer through memes, nodes, and shared experience. It's the recoding of the self. It rewires your head, right? Your reason, your verification, your long-term thinking. It rewires your heart, right? Hope, sovereignty, belief in human freedom, prosperity. And it rewires your hands, right? How to build things, how to take action, how to hold custody, just making things, right? And anyone who's gone through a full cycle knows that this is trial by fire. So the question becomes, what story are we telling now? What challenges lie ahead? How do we carry these symbols forward as we build the future? And from my point of view, I think Bitcoin's at a crossroads right now. In the US, many believe Bitcoin has already won, that it has gone mainstream. But this moment is different from the early days of Bitcoin. We are no longer wondering, will Bitcoin survive? We are wondering, what will Bitcoin become? And history shows what happens when revolutions go mainstream. When Christianity became legalized under Constantine, the rebel faith became the imperial faith. When punk rock was signed to major labels, anti-establishment music became a commercial product. When the early internet met venture capital, the frontier became an industry. But in every case, success forces a movement to confront itself. And so Bitcoin, as we know, acts like a mirror. The identity of the outsider no longer fits, but the identity of the establishment feels like betrayal. This is the tension. This is the moment we are in. And so we have three routes, I think, we can go from here, right? The purest insurrection, reassert founding principles, and protect the cultural core at all costs. We could go institutional translation, right? Transform Bitcoin's principles into something palatable for corporations and states. but we risk dilution or even capture. Or mythic reinvention. Stop defining Bitcoin by what we're resisting and start defining it by what we will build. Blocksize describes the rise of network states, right? Communities like ours coordinating digitally, gathering capital and conviction until we begin to shape the physical world around us. And I believe that the next 10 years in Bitcoin will be defined by this. When we say fix the money, fix the world, we should stand by that. But it won't happen automatically. It requires builders, capital, and creators. So here's my ask of you, especially to all the designers, the artists, and creators in this room. When we design the next institutions, the next products, even cities, right? Let's carry the Bitcoin symbolism with us. Let's continue to break out into public works and architecture. Let's fight against the aesthetic of monoculture and create timeless brands again. Let's let our symbols continue to encode our lessons so we do not forget where we came from. And at the Bitcoin conference, all of these ideas were top of mind when we developed this year's theme, Foundation 2.0. We see the Bitcoin conference evolving into the new World's Fair, a place where emerging technologies meets capital, where builders meet culture, and where the best in the world come together to chart what's next. This is the frontier, and the Bitcoin conference is where history is written. But I'll leave you with this, right? We've fought this hard to get here. This is not the time for Bitcoiners to retire off into the sunset. This is the time to double down. We must become stewards of what comes next, and our symbols will live beyond us. Thank you, Amsterdam, and I'll see you next year.